Welcome to Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. The headlines. French bank Société Générale faces tough questions today over its failure to spot the biggest rogue trader deal in history. Iraq says there's no need for OPEC to adjust production when it meets next week. We'll be speaking to the Iraqi oil minister. And the president of the Philippines, Gloria Arroyo, will be among my guests as we set the agenda in Davos Today. First to Asia, where stock markets have advanced on the back of the US tax stimulus package and the prospect of another Fed rate cut. Let's get the latest from Reuters reporter Tara Joseph in Hong Kong. Tara.
Hello, Steve. A third straight day of gains for Asia stocks. Investors are feeling a sense of hope thanks to U.S. economic rescue plans. Late on Thursday, congressional leaders and the White House confirmed a $150 billion stimulus package of tax rebates for families and incentives for business investment. The region is awash with talk about SocGen's trader, who managed to trigger $7 billion in losses. But the news has not had an impact on trade here today. Japan's Nikkei ended the week on a high note, up around 3.8% near the close. The Tokyo index almost, but not quite, able to erase losses made earlier in the week. Mizuho Bank was a top gainer today. Japan's second largest lender jumped about 10% on talk the firm will form a business tie-up with India's largest bank. Japanese media reports say the tie-up with Bank of India is set to be announced later on in the day. Commodities have also been among the big gainers on Friday. Gold is near an all-time high, trading at around $909.50 an ounce. A weak dollar and expectations the U.S. Federal Reserve may again cut interest rates at its meeting next week, helping the precious metal. Oil continued its rally towards $90 a barrel as recession fears fade. Crude oil is now trading at around $89.90. Strong oil and gold counters giving a big boost to the Hang Seng Index here in Hong Kong. It's up 5.3% at the lunchtime break. And in Australia, strong mining shares have helped to power a rally for stocks in Sydney. So overall, a very positive session, erasing some of the severe losses that we saw early in the week. Steve, back to you in Davos.
Thanks very much, Tara. Let's find out what's happening in the world news headlines. Here's Siddhartha Dubey in the Reuters London newsroom.
Morning, Steve. Israel has carried out several airstrikes against Palestinian targets in the border town of Rafah in southern Gaza, killing at least 4 people. The first strike was targeted at a truck which the Israeli army said had terror operatives inside. Strikes against militants in Gaza are frequent. The border at Rafah has been breached in a series of explosions, with thousands of Palestinians pouring into Egypt to stock up on food and fuel following an Israeli blockade. To Iraq, and the top police official in the northern city of Mosul was killed on Thursday when he was touring the site of the previous day's explosion. This is the massive crater caused by an explosion that killed 36 people and wounded 169 others on Wednesday. Many women and children perished as buildings around them, the explosion collapsed. Dozens of wounded people were brought to a nearby hospital. The police officer who held the title of Brigadier General was killed when a suicide bomber walked up to him and detonated himself. In Washington, President George W. Bush says his $150 billion fiscal stimulus package will help the economy.
The incentives in this package will lead to higher consumer spending and increased business investment this year. Importantly, this package recognizes that lowering taxes is a powerful and efficient way to help consumers and businesses.
The size of the package is equivalent to around 1% of the American economy and is aimed at preventing a full-blown recession. Italy's Prime Minister Romano Prodi has resigned after losing a confidence vote in Parliament. Prodi's centre-left government lasted less than 2 years. His defeat came after a small religious party resigned from his coalition. This is what happened as the news broke in the Upper House Senate.
Senatori, no, per favore, togliete quella bottiglia là.
Romano Prodi will continue to serve as Prime Minister until Italy's President appoints an interim government. Well, Steve, that's all for now from London. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Siddhartha, for that update. Well, the takeover by Thomson of Reuters is with the competition authorities, and the companies have said they expect the deal to close in Q2. As you've heard on this program, markets have been in turmoil this week, and there's been talk of a US recession in Davos. That means difficult times for Reuters' main clients. Tom Glocer, who will become CEO of Thomson Reuters, is with me now. We've been asking this to all the CEOs, Tom. How do you see the year ahead? We know the markets and the bankers seem worried. Do you share their concerns?
Well, we're off to a very good start. Don't forget, Reuters covers the entire world, and our Asia business, which is significant, has been doing very well of late. And in general, emerging markets, Eastern Europe, Middle East, we have not seen a profound softening in the US, so that market is still holding up, but obviously we're looking at the same data as everyone else.
We know this has been hitting banks and institutions. There are write-downs, there are fears of job losses. That surely hits a company like Reuters that's selling financial services.
Yes and no. I mean, don't forget, the more volatile the markets are, the more volumes we're seeing going through exchanges and the Reuters transaction systems, the greater need there is for event-driven trading. So news is more important than ever. Absolute low latency, fast data. So yes, in general, a recession is never good for anyone, but we're quite well positioned.
Now, you sold Reuters to Thomson last year. That deal is still going through the regulatory process. How do you see the timing there now, and are you confident you'll get approval?
Absolutely confident. No change to the public timetable. This deal will get approved this quarter. And we're in the final stretch to completing it and getting on with the integration. It's very exciting.
Why did you want to do that deal? What does Thomson Reuters have that Reuters didn't have on its own?
It's a fantastic combination. The complementarity of the two businesses, the opportunity to be the leader not only in financial information and media for professionals, but in legal, in tax and accounting, in scientific, in healthcare. These are tremendous positions on the Thomson side, and I can't wait to begin actually implementing our integration plans.
Let's take a look at the Davos scene. I know you're a regular here now. We've been hearing about the SocGen story, absolutely massive loss by the bank there. Has that been what they've been talking about in the parties and the lobbies here last night?
Oh, you know, absolutely. I mean, there's been a fair amount of snickering that, wasn't that the bank that was just voted Equity Derivatives House of the Year for their financial controls? But, you know, obviously it's very serious. What I think is great is that JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley have been able to come in and basically in the 24 hours before today put together the appropriate equity package to make sure that the bank isn't just totally brought down by that. And, you know, I think it's a sign of the resilience of the market. It's not just the sovereign wealth fund that's been able to do it. You know, the traditional sell side has come to restructure that bank.
We've not been short of financial news this week in Davos. We came out to Asian market, massive tumble, an emergency Fed rate cut. Now we've had a US stimulus package. What are your fellow CEOs making of all this? It feels pretty nervous, doesn't it?
Well, I think most of them are like me, which is, you know, I'm not a financial market speculator. I sell Reuters terminals. I don't sit in front of one and try and take positions. So I've got an operating business to run, already a very interesting one, and now one with great opportunity through integrating Thomson and Reuters. And yes, it is very important to have a handle on the macro environment. We've done this mostly through our budget and forecast process, and we're looking quite good where we sit at the moment.
What about the mood in Davos more generally? I mean, do you think anything concrete ever really comes out of these sessions at the end of the day? There's 2,500 delegates, a lot of parties, a lot of talking, a lot of sessions, but what do you take away at the end of it?
Well, I'm not a Davos cynic. You know, I think for years people have derided the talk fest and somewhat cynically said nothing ever comes of it. But that's not what I've seen. I see people who genuinely come here in an attempt to solve, or at least to help to solve, the most difficult issues. There is follow-up action. I'll give you an example. Someone I met in one of my first Davos meetings 5-6 years ago, Lars Josefsson from Vattenfall, has began an environmental initiative which has led to the 3C initiative on global warming, and with lots of follow-up work, Reuters included, post the meeting. So I do see good things that come from it.
What's been the big issue here, though, as far as you're concerned? Has it really been dominated by that financial news and perhaps to the exclusion of other things?
Yes, I mean, things go in cycles. So, you know, one year everyone wakes up and remembers Africa. India has been an ongoing theme with quite a concerted push. This year it's difficult to get off of the prime economic story. And, you know, in the end of the day, this is the World Economic Forum, so perhaps that's appropriate.
Tom Glocer from Reuters, thanks a lot for joining us today. Well, with Davos now in full swing, we've been hearing what the summit's biggest names have to say about the prospects for the US economy. Reuters reporter Darcy Lampton caught up with Nobel Prize-winning Professor Joseph Stiglitz, a former chief economist at the World Bank, who also served under President Bill Clinton.
The US economy's woes have loomed large over this year's summit. Subprime mortgage meltdown is a phrase widely bandied about. One key question now doing the rounds: is the US on the brink of recession, or is it already in one? Certainly there are few big thinkers inside the forum who are bullish, and the former chief economist of the World Bank, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, is no exception.
I am a bear. To be full disclosure, I've been a bear for the last couple of years, and you might say the recent events have vindicated a bearish view at the current time. There really are some deep structural problems. The fact that the U.S. had to borrow in 2006 $850 billion from other countries, the richest country in the world, fundamental global imbalances, financial systems that don't know how to manage risk. These are not symptoms of what you might call a fundamentally strong economy.
In a bid to restore some market stability, the Federal Reserve slashed US interest rates by 0.75% earlier this week. For Professor Stiglitz, that's not good enough. He says the Fed's policy is actually part of the problem.
They were a major factor contributing to the current mess. They should have had stronger regulations. They put in regulations too late. They should not have done what they did to encourage some of the froth in the market. When people asked, is there a problem in real estate, they said, oh, don't worry. So they have not just been silent, they've been a cheerleader for the current problem.
Recent market volatility again shows just how nervous investors are regarding the continued fallout from the global credit crunch. And Professor Stiglitz is clearly one bear who has no immediate plans for hibernation. Darcy Lampton, Reuters.
Well, Iraq is home to the third largest oil stash in the world with 115 billion barrels of proven crude oil reserves. According to the IMF, better security and more output could boost Iraq's GDP growth to 7% a year from a meager 1.3% now. We're here to talk about Iraq's prospects is Oil Minister Hussein al-Shahristani. Thank you very much for joining us today. President Bush on his visit to the Middle East last week expressed his hopes that OPEC might pump more oil. Do you see that as very likely yourself?
Well, OPEC has always been ready to provide the market with its needs, energy needs, oil needs. However, we don't feel that there is a shortage of oil on the market today. But if that would be the case, when we revise our statistics, then we are always ready to provide the market.
What about your own shipments? We know Iraq has these huge natural resources. How do you see the prognosis for increasing shipments yourself and production?
As of today, Iraq has increased production by about 400,000 barrels a day since in the last quarter of 2007. And we are currently producing 2.3 million barrels a day. And we expect to increase it during 2008 to somewhere around 2.6, even 2.7 million barrels a day. So we'll be increasing our production. And all the increase will go to export. We don't need it domestically.
You've had oil installations shut down, I think, because of power cuts. Is that sabotage, or is it just a creaking infrastructure, if you like?
Although the infrastructure has been neglected for decades now because of the wars that Saddam led the country to, but it's mostly sabotage. And in the oil industry, we have managed to protect our pipelines through our oil protection force. But it's the electrical grid that keeps on being attacked by the insurgents, by Al-Qaeda, and it's affecting our refinery capacity.
So logically then, increased production is completely entwined with the security situation. How do you see that improving?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, when I mentioned earlier that we have increased our production, that was purely by providing better security, protecting our pipelines through Turkey, that go through Turkey. With the national awakening and reconciliation that's going on in the country, there is a much improved environment for the security, which has been reflected on better security at our installations, and we expect this to improve and will allow us to even increase our production and export.
What's your own outlook for oil prices internationally? We've seen them touch $100 a barrel. They're down now, touching 90, 89. What do you see the outlook there yourself?
Quite frankly, those price movements, erratic movements, have nothing to do with the market forces, with market fundamentals. There has been sufficient oil on the market. OPEC has been very responsive to any demand. It's mostly speculators that keep on taking the price up and down, and we expect the price to remain at the current level, or even perhaps slightly lower during 2008.
Could that be around 80, 85? Do you see it somewhere in that range?
Perhaps between 70 and 80.
What about the backdrop here in Davos? A lot of talk about a US recession. Logically, if that did happen, you would expect lower demand from the US and other Western countries, and that would lead surely to a lower oil price.
Well, we have been hearing about possible recession in the United States. We have not seen any effect on the oil demand, neither in the US or outside the US. On the contrary, there has been an increase in the demand, and our forecast for 2008 is there will be a further demand for oil, so we don't think that is going to affect the oil.
You're in the process of tendering out contracts, I think, for extraction to foreign oil companies. How is that process going?
It's going very well. Almost all the oil companies, the large and small, are very much interested to come and work in Iraq. Many of them have registered to be qualified. And we are going to sign in the first quarter of 2008 what we call technical support contracts, but this is a bridging contract for a year or two. And we are going to go through the first bid round for field developments. These are the supergiant Iraqi fields, the brown fields. We are going to sign contracts for the development of those fields by the end of 2008, and we'll go through a second round of bids in 2009.
Minister, thank you very much for joining us today in Davos. Well, Societe Generale faces tough questions today over its failure to spot a rogue dealing fraud in which a single trader triggered a $7 billion loss. Analysts and newspapers have questioned how long France's second largest bank can remain independent. This morning's newspapers make grim reading for Societe Generale. Libération today plays on the bank's name with the headline Irresponsabilité Générale. And Le Monde is headlined Questions and Incredulity after the Societe Generale fraud. Well, Joanna Partridge from Reuters brings us the latest on the SocGen scandal.
French bank Societe Generale reveals fraud by a single trader, identified by SocGen sources as Jérôme Kerviel, has caused it to lose 4.9 billion euros. SocGen, France's second largest listed bank and one of its most prestigious blue chip companies, said it would seek emergency funds. If the fraud is proved, it would be the biggest loss ever caused by a single trader, far outstripping the $1.4 billion loss caused to Barings Bank by Nick Leeson in the 1990s. Societe Generale turned down Chairman and Chief Executive Daniel Bouton's offer of resignation. Bouton told a news conference the bank would still have positive results for 2007, despite the fraud.
La situation était très solide. The situation was very stable as we didn't have any liquidity problems, even after this fraud. However, in order to continue profitable development in all our lines of work, the Board of Directors considered it necessary to carry out an increase in capital.
But the bank's expected 2007 net profit of between 600 and 800 million euros would be well below its 2006 profit figure. And SocGen has also announced further write-downs of over 2 billion euros related to the global credit crunch. French Prime Minister François Fillon, in Switzerland at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, tried to calm nerves. He said the fraud was serious, but didn't have anything to do with current market turbulence.
Je note que la Société Générale, malgré cette fraude, affiche un bilan.
I note that despite this fraud, Société Générale is posting positive results. I note that it has taken important steps to address the situation. I note the Bank of France has indicated that it doesn't have any worries about the stability of this bank. I am pleased about that, and I should tell you that the French government is following the case with very, very great attention.
Meanwhile, Bank of France Governor Christian Noyer told a news conference new measures will have to be introduced to prevent malpractice like this fraud happening in future. SocGen shares were initially suspended from trading on the news, but later fell by over 6%. Joanna Partridge, Reuters.
Well, from video games to mobile phones to a record label that is the home to Beyoncé, Britney Spears and Celine Dion, Sony has the entertainment world covered. But as the US economy slows and the yen strengthens, there could be clouds ahead. Well, CEO Sir Howard Stringer is with me here in the studio. So Howard, first of all, a lot of talk of recession we've been saying in the US. Not good for your flat screens and game sales, surely?
There's no evidence that that's true. Oddly enough, everything that's been happening at Sony has been sort of counterintuitive to the gloom and doom that's around, because we had record Christmas sales, double-digit growth year on year, and the video game world PS3 is coming back with a vengeance, and the movie industry is flourishing. Box office are records this year.
What about the strength of the yen? How much of a problem is that for you?
Well, there's always an impact on exports, and the yen is very volatile. So it's a little too early to know what the long-term effect in the next quarter. But we watch it with some anxiety, I think.
You had a downgrade this week from Goldman Sachs. How do you feel about that? I think they were optimistic about the TV side, but obviously worried about other things.
Yeah, I thought it was a little knee-jerk. I mean, they were doing the same to everybody. They put us on a hold, and as you know, we increased 25% year on year throughout the year, so we look so good. Maybe if we look so good, we would be the first to look a little less good. But I don't think that was there was cause for that.
Now, what about the importance of the PS3? That was the PlayStation 3. That was a very big launch for you. You had a little bit of a false start with it because you put it out with a bigger memory and a higher price, pulled that back, lowered the price with smaller memory. Do you feel that's settled down now?
Yes, I think so. I think there's people tend to forget we have more than one PlayStation. We sold over 30 million PlayStations last year. We tend to get compared, PS3 tends to get compared to Xbox or compared to the Wii. Nobody actually says, well, what about PS2, PSP and PS1? PS3 has now gone past Xbox in the Christmas markets. It's moving into its own as it gets into higher bandwidth. The 20 gig games create more opportunity and excitement for players, and that rhythm is beginning to take place. So PlayStation 3, I think, is out of the woods and beginning to hold its own.
What's your strategy for those games consoles? Because it's quite interesting. You look at something like the PS3, you can surf the internet on it, you can put games on it, you can put pictures on it. It is in effect a home computer with a games machine attached. Is that going to merge into other forms of entertainment and use in the home, do you think?
Yes, I mean, obviously that much processing power has enormous potential. We haven't been talking about it much lately because we want to re-establish its games dominance. But as we move towards the PlayStation network and deliver content from PS3 to PSP and to devices beyond that, obviously the power of PS3 will come into its own.
Just turning to your phones business, we've had mixed reports recently from Nokia, Motorola. How does your own business sit in there?
Well, it's we announced our results last week. I think they were well received. We are now getting into the American market, which has been a tough nut for us to crack because of the control of the operators. But now we've done some deals with AT&T and T-Mobile. So I think once we become competitive in the US, we'll be in pretty good shape.
You've also got a music industry arm. We've been reading a lot in the UK about what's been happening at EMI, some pretty radical restructuring there. The artists don't like it, they're cutting the roster. Any plans yourself for the Guy Hans approach to music management?
We actually think we've done all the hacking and hewing. I'm not sure there's much more hacking to be done. The issues are more complex than just laying off people, and we're having a reasonably good year. Obviously, packaged goods are down, but we're beginning to find alternative sources of revenue. Just finally,
what about Davos itself? You've come here out to the snow. It's a long way from Japan. What do you get out of it? Do you take away anything useful at the end of the day?
Well, its biggest value is the concentration of sort of intellectual and economic firepower and talent. I mean, it's the only place in the world, really, where you can sit in a room with 7 people with totally divergent experiences, and that's the fun of it. There's a lot of hot air here, which doesn't contribute to global warming, I don't think. But that said, it's unlike any other experience, and I've enjoyed it. I stayed away for 2 years. I've actually enjoyed it more than I remember.
Okay, so Hans Stringer, thanks a lot for coming in today. Let's take a quick look now at some of the sessions on the agenda at the forum today. Here's Nidhi Dutt.
Emerging markets and globalization will be on the agenda in Davos today. The so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, are now emerging as global superpowers. But as they become the places to do big business, the question is, which countries will play home to the next set of emerging markets? The UK's Prime Minister Gordon Brown will be discussing the big issues that face Britain. Also appearing in that debate will be the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Also on the agenda, how the global economic slowdown is affecting developed and developing countries in different ways. Leading the debate on this issue will be the President of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, along with the Vice Chairman of the People's Republic of China, Zheng Xuei, and the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Timothy Geithner. Bite-sized technology has played a big role in making the world a smaller place. The head of Google USA, Eric Schmidt, and the chairman and CEO of Sony Corporation, Sir Howard Stringer, will be debating how convergence in communication will affect consumers around the world. Also appearing will be the chairman and chief executive of China Mobile Communications, Wang Jianzhou. Some of Asia's leaders will be discussing the emergence of a new regional community, including the Prime Ministers of Malaysia, Singapore and the President of the Philippines, Gloria Arroyo. Other sessions taking place today are moving people and goods around the globe, political Islam and democracy, long-term value in a short-term world, and USA, what next after the elections. Today, the World Economic Forum will also honor artists who have used their art to reach out to other cultures. American cellist Yo-Yo Ma and British actress Emma Thompson will be awarded the organization's Crystal Awards. All that and more on the third day of Davos 2008.
You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark for Reuters. The time now, it's 7:27. Well, let's take a look at the weather coming up in Davos this morning with the all-important ski conditions. Here's Daniel Amann, the managing director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos. Daniel, dawn is breaking just behind you. A little bit of snow I thought, as I came in this morning. But what are you seeing today for the weather?
I think after we had a really beautiful and sunny day yesterday, which was very warm, we had an overcast during the night, and it will also remain for the morning. In the afternoon, again, it should be very sunny and just gorgeous.
In terms of the piece to go to, is it going to be pretty busy up there today? And where would you be skiing today?
I don't think it's going to be too busy today. The conditions will be just wonderful. Based on the little cloud fields we do have in the morning, I would take it easy, go in the afternoon on the sunny slopes, and then head for a night skiing on Parsen.
And what's the skiing conditions like in Davos this week? I mean, do we get a lot of people skiing during the forum, or do the slopes tend to be emptier than usual?
It tends to be emptier than usual because most people here are either in security or they actually visiting the World Economic Forum. So the slopes are quite empty and it's wonderful. So if you do have the time to get out, do it because the conditions are just wonderful.
Daniel Mann, thanks a lot. The time now, it's 7:30. you're watching Davos Today, coming to you live from the heart of Davos with the latest from the World Economic Forum annual meeting. Coming up in the program, we'll be speaking to President Gloria Arroyo of the Philippines and Bob Diamond, the head of Barclays. But first, let's get the latest news from the markets in Asia. Tara Joseph is standing by in Reuters Hong Kong bureau. Tara.
Hello, Steve. It's been a tremendous rally to end the week of trade here in Asia. Investors cheering a U.S. economic rescue plan. Late on Thursday, congressional leaders and the White House confirmed a $150 billion stimulus package of tax rebates for families. There are also incentives for business investment. The region is full of talk about SocGen's trader, who managed to trigger $7 billion in trading losses under the noses of top executives. But the news has not had an impact on trade here today. Japan's Nikkei ending the week on a very strong note, up 4.1% at the close just about half an hour ago. This was the largest one-day gain for the Nikkei in nearly 6 years. Mizuho Bank was a top gainer. Japan's second largest lender jumped 11% on talk the firm will form a business tie-up with India's largest bank. Japanese media reports say the tie-up with Bank of India is set to be announced later on in the day. Now, commodities have also been big among the gainers here in Asia. Gold is near an all-time high, now trading at around $911.75 an ounce. A weak dollar and expectations that the U.S. Fed may again cut interest rates at its meeting next week, helping the precious metal. And oil enjoying a second-day rally as recession fears start to fade. Crude oil is now trading at about $89.98 a barrel. Strong oil and gold counters giving a big boost to the Hang Seng Index here in Hong Kong. It's up 5.3% at the midday break. And in Australia, strong mining shares have helped to power a rally for stocks in Sydney. So a strong end to what has been a roller coaster week for Asia markets, Steve. Now it's all eyes on what the Fed will do next week. Back to you in Davos.
Thanks, Tara. Let's get the world news now. We cross live to Siddhartha Dubey in the Reuters London newsroom. Siddhartha.
Hi, Steve. Israel has carried out several airstrikes against Palestinian targets in the border town of Rafah in southern Gaza, killing at least 4 people. The strikes targeted vehicles which the Israeli army said had terror operatives inside. You're now looking at the latest Reuters pictures from Gaza, which have just come into our newsroom. Strikes against militants in Gaza are frequent. The border at Rafah has been breached in a series of explosions, with thousands of Palestinians pouring into Egypt to stock up on fuel following an Israeli blockade. To Iraq, and the top police official in the northern city of Mosul was killed on Thursday when he was touring the site of the previous day's explosion. This is a massive crater caused by an explosion that killed 36 people and wounded 169 others on Wednesday. Many women and children perished as buildings around them collapsed. Dozens of wounded people were brought into a nearby hospital. The police officer who held the title of Brigadier General was killed when a suicide bomber walked up to him and detonated himself. To Washington, and President George W. Bush says his $150 billion fiscal stimulus package will help the economy.
The incentives in this package will lead to higher consumer spending and increased business investment this year. Importantly, this package recognizes that lowering taxes is a powerful and efficient way to help consumers and businesses.
The size of the package is equivalent to around 1% of the American economy and is aimed at preventing a full-blown recession. Italy's Prime Minister Romano Prodi has resigned after losing a confidence vote in Parliament. Prodi's centre-left government lasted less than 2 years. His defeat came after a small religious party resigned from his coalition. This is what happened as the news broke in the upper house Senate.
Senatori, no, per favore, togliete quella bottiglia là.
Romano Prodi will continue to serve as Prime Minister until Italy's president appoints an interim government. Well, that's it for now. Steve, back to you.
Sid, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, the Philippines has renewed an offer to communist rebels to accept a ceasefire deal as a step to restarting peace talks on ending a 4-decade rebellion. Ricardo Saludo, Secretary of President Gloria Arroyo's cabinet, told Reuters that the government is heeding the church's call for peace. And the president said in a speech delivered earlier this week, that the Philippines is well placed to weather the turbulent economic conditions ahead. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the Philippines president. Thank you very much for coming in today. What about that security situation? How do you see it developing yourself in the Philippines? Do you feel this is an important breakthrough?
Well, the communist rebels have, as you have read in reading the news, have been in the Philippines for many years as a low-level threat. They have no chance of winning or taking over power from the Philippine government, but they do impede progress in a number of rural areas. And we have to stop their ideological nonsense once and for all. They violate human rights. They disturb the peace and order in those communities. But how do we stop their ideological nonsense? We do it through a holistic approach, soft power and hard power. As far as hard power is concerned, we have been defeating them militarily, battle after battle in those hinterlands. But we also bring about development in the poorest parts of the Philippines so that they will not fall prey to the siren song or the swan call of the communist rebels. Having said that, we do want to offer them the hand of peace. And many of the church leaders have been helping us to bring about this peace. We have offered an amnesty. I have made an amnesty proclamation, and the requirement of the law is that this proclamation be confirmed by the legislature, so that's under process. So indeed, this is something that has been our attitude, and we hope that with the help of civil society and the church, we will have lasting peace in those parts of the countryside that are suffering from their atrocities.
You talk about soft power and hard power, and hard power, I suppose, would be the military. But how confident are you of the support of your own military? There was talk about a coup while you were here in Davos. No news of that so far, but do you think they're supporting you fully?
Well, they have been supporting me fully in all of my in all of the challenges to peace and order that we have been having. And also the people do not want any more instability. We're having a good growth rate in our economy. It's growing at 7.1% so far from the figures of the 3 quarters. Our poverty rate is down. Our unemployment rate is down. So people want peace and order, and they want progress, and they want jobs. They don't want political instability.
You mentioned that growth rate there. I think you're about to bring out growth figures. What are you seeing there in terms of growth?
Well, it will be in the neighborhood of 7%, because for the 3 quarters we were 7.1%, and this is way beyond the projections of the international financial institutions.
What about on the budget deficit for 2007? Yes. What are you seeing there?
Our medium-term plan says that we should have a balanced budget by 2010. My economic managers were so enthused about the results of our tax reforms that they said we could move the target forward to 2008. But in November of last year, we're having a surplus of 11.7 billion pesos. So when the figures of the last month will come out, well, my economic managers might surprise even themselves that we might have had a balanced budget in 2007. But in any case, the market wasn't expecting that. But so if it comes, then it's going to be a windfall.
You've had a ratings upgrade from Moody's today. It's obviously good news for you. Also, we hear the Kuwaitis may invest more than $10 billion in infrastructure projects in the Philippines. Is that deal going ahead?
Well, we are... when we talk about the soft and hard power, to bring about peace in the countryside in the Philippines, in southern Philippines, this is with the support of a very, very large alliance of nations, including the Middle Eastern countries. So we're very, very appreciative of their support. In fact, they have already been helping us with some very important road projects in the heart of Mindanao.
Right. And any other key projects apart from that? You've got road projects. What other sort of things might that money fund?
Well, Mindanao is very much lacking in physical infrastructure because before my tax reforms, we could not build infrastructure unless we borrowed. Our tax revenues were just enough to cover salaries, debt service, and the mandatory subsidy to local governments. So any infrastructure or any social services had to come from borrowed funds. So there was a very big backlog. When I became president and we had the tax reforms, now we're catching up on that backlog. So there's a lot of road building, airport building, port building, bridge building to be done, as well as school buildings.
What about the economic background unfolding this week in Davos? Asian markets took a big tumble on Monday. Been talk of recession here with an emergency rate cut from the US, a stimulus package in the US. How do you see that background against your own prospects for growth? Is it worrying for you?
Well, let's put it this way. Because we're very interconnected in the world today, every nation should be able to manage the ups and downs of another nation's bubbles. But having said that, the good news is that the Philippines seems to have, because of our reforms, achieved a level of maturity and stability that can help us to withstand, that makes us more resilient than at any other point in time in our history to be able to withstand the external shocks. And this is the message I have been getting from all the financial CEOs that I have been having conversations with here in Davos.
You've come a long way to Davos from the Philippines. What do you get out of it? What do you find useful about the meeting here?
Well, it's very important that because we are an interconnected world, that we have opportunities for world business, economic, and financial leaders to get together. So, and that is what Davos offers. And this year especially, with the events in the world happening this week, all the more Davos became important because because of the uncertainties that have unfolded this past week. All the more important is it for the world leaders in business and government to get together and collaborate more closely.
President Gloria Arroyo, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Well, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff warned recently that one of the biggest threats to U.S. security may now come from within Europe. Our reporter Darcy Lampton caught up with Mr. Chertoff yesterday and asked him for his view of the global security situation.
I think it is still a real-life threat, as I've said over the last 6 to 9 months. Strategically, the picture has become somewhat problematic if you look at what's going on in certain parts of South Asia. We've had some successes against al-Qaeda, for example, in Iraq, but there have also been some reminders that we live in a dangerous world, most recently in Spain. And, of course, the Budo assassination remind us that there are people out there who are dedicated enemies of freedom and of Western civilization.
And when it comes to security on the international scene, are all countries singing off the same hymn sheet? I'm thinking of the UK, for example. We saw the failed attacks in Glasgow and in London. How would you assess the current threat that the UK faces? And are security forces in the UK, do you think, providing the right measures to prevent future attacks?
Well, I think we are, first of all, singing off the same page of the hymn book because we have a common strategy. We have a close exchange of information and intelligence. We recognize the seriousness of the challenge, particularly homegrown terrorism, which is something we've got to counteract because that is a source of these kinds of attacks. But I think we also have to recognize from an American standpoint that Europe is increasingly both a target and a platform for terrorism, and that means we want to work with the Europeans to make sure we address these problems before we see more negative consequences.
And finally, one of the issues you're addressing here in Davos concerns internet security, the use of the internet by Islamic jihadists to carry out atrocities somewhere in the world. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I think we're concerned about three things. I think we're concerned about the use of the internet as a recruiting tool. I think we're concerned about the use of the internet as a training tool, teaching people how to make bombs. And I think we're concerned about the use of the internet as a way of communicating in a fashion that's undetected. So I think each of these problems has to be dealt with, and in a way that doesn't compromise the unique value of the internet as an open architecture.
Michael Chertoff there. Well, the SocGen fraud story may be dominating financial headlines this morning, but fears of a US recession and continued concern about write-downs related to the subprime crisis remain the focus of the investment banking industry. Barclays, Britain's third biggest bank, announced write-downs of £1.3 billion in November, but has indicated that there are no further exposures for the bank. Bob Diamond, the CEO of Barclays, joins me now in the studio. Bob Diamond, is that right? Are you pretty confident you've got all that stuff out there now?
Well, Steve, we're in a closed period, so we can't talk about current financials. We'll be able to do that on February 19th. But as you mentioned, in November, John Varley and I gave a pretty clear indication of how things were going with the pain that we had taken in the subprime area, but also clarity around the fact that we expected the Barclays Group to be on consensus earnings. And importantly for Barclays Capital and Barclays Global Investors, the big capital markets units, to be ahead of the 2006 pace, which was a record. So, at that time, we're very confident, and as I've said this week, if we had other material financial news to report, we would be doing it.
I understand that. I mean, we have got a very aggressive growth target this year. Isn't that going to be very difficult to meet, though, against the sort of economic background we're seeing unfold this week?
Yes, we have reiterated the confidence we have in our capital markets-oriented businesses, again, our investment management business, our investment banking business, and our wealth business. And what we've said is we still expect, and I still expect, 15 to 20% growth over the cycle. Your question is a good one. We all expect 2008 to be a very difficult environment. So when we talk about those growth rates, we always talk over the cycle, and there are certain years where we'll exceed them and certain years that will be slightly behind. I think we all have to plan that 2008 could be one of those tough years. We've seen tremendous volatility in January, and while there's been a lot of good news over the last couple of days, we would expect this to be a tough year.
What about that SocGen story breaking today? Every banker's nightmare, and perhaps you thought after Barings it couldn't happen again, but it has. Does that make you worry about things like controls within the bank?
It's my job to worry about things like controls, and I think there's two thrusts to certainly how we approach this. One is, frankly, around culture, and hiring the right people and having the right culture, and having a culture where we expect people to be open and honest and be able to bring the problems forward. But it's also about technology, and I think for us, putting in place the right culture of the organization, but also putting in place the right technology is how we approach these types of situations. But as you said, this is very specific to SocGen, and I probably don't know much more about the specific situation than we both read in the papers.
Just enough to worry you a bit. Everyone worries about their own prospects, I suppose, and they worry about their capital adequacy in cases like this. How do you feel about your own capital ratings in the light of the general sort of worry in the sector? Are those adequate?
I think there's a couple thrusts to this. For the banks that took big write-offs and produced losses, they needed more equity. But I think, in the case of Citibank and Merrill, for example, but I think the good news is there was an almost simultaneous write-down of those exposures, which were quite large, with a transfer of equity from Asia into the big U.S. banks. And, from someone who's been a market participant for 25 years, it's great to see that kind of flow of risk from Asia to the U.S. and how quickly it happened. It was almost simultaneous with the write-downs. Stepping back from that and looking at the banking industry, I think because of the difficulty of 2007, also the introduction of Basel II in 2008, all of us recognize that capital will increasingly be an issue that we face over 2008, 2009, and going forward.
Could you see yourself at Barclays looking east, as it were, for a capital injection, as others have?
Well, John Varley and the board and myself and everyone else are very, very comfortable with both the equity position, capital position, balance sheet position of Barclays. Last year, when we were looking at doing a deal with the merger with ABN AMRO, we did have equity from the China Development Bank along with our strategic partnership in Temasek. Part of it unconditional on the deal, but I think probably in line with what I said about our position, the part of it that was unconditional and came to us regardless of whether we completed the deal or not was neutralized by doing share buybacks.
Now, just changing topic slightly, because you're sitting on the climate change panel, which is exactly the type of thing everyone's been saying is going to get pushed into the background a bit because of all the economic news this week. I mean, do you feel that has happened and there hasn't really been enough focus on it, if you like, in Davos this year?
You know, I was really privileged to be asked to moderate the session here yesterday with finance governors. We had Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. We had a great panel, and I think all of us were very pleasantly surprised at how much engagement there was between the public policy side and the private sector. And every bank, Barclays, HSBC, JP Morgan, have not only done more in this space than I would have anticipated coming in, but are anxious to do more. And I think, you know, Barclays is the #1 provider of liquidity in carbon and emissions markets around the world. And so for us, this is a very important topic, and it's an area where we expect to continue to invest.
Bob Diamond from Barclays Capital, good to see you today. Thanks a lot for coming along.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, as we know, the Fed slashed interest rates this week as stock markets around the world fell on fears the US is tipping into recession. Jane Barrett asked ECB member Axel Weber whether he was worried that market volatility was threatening growth.
Current financial turbulence have hit both the financial industry and the real economy in a stage where actually it was very resilient, stronger than in the last few years. So now there is a correction, and I really caution market participants to not overdo and to not exaggerate this short-term volatility. In the medium term, the outlook for the global economy is still good, it's still robust, so I have no reason for pessimism at this stage. There was exuberance, there was euphoria before, and some of this euphoria goes, I think, for good and I think for right.
So what are your main concerns now looking ahead into the medium term? Is it still inflation?
Our main concerns for the euro area are that inflation at the moment is above our tolerance level. We have the expectation that this will moderate throughout this year and into next year, but there are some risks to the outlook. There is the risk of higher wage settlements, renewed oil prices, geopolitical tensions, and for growth we expect growth around potential, so not extraordinary high, but relatively normal growth, basically along the capacity of the euro area economy. But at the same time, there are some downside risks for growth. We also said that, and we have to keep a focus on these downside risks. But the data are mixed. I don't think we have a clear indication that the euro area economy is substantially weakening. Look at what came out today in the IFO index in Germany. It's been better than expected, so we do see positive and negative data, but overall I think the balance of risk is to the downside, but the medium-term outlook is still reasonably good.
Thank you very much indeed.
Axel Weber there. Well, the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Hashim Thaçi, who has been in talks in Brussels this week, has said he's confident he has the backing of US and European allies to declare independence from Serbia and is ready to take steps in a matter of days. Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt, who says one of his main tasks is to help bolster European Union foreign policy, is with me in the studio now. Carl Bildt, you've been working in the Balkans for many years yourself. How do you see the picture in Kosovo right now? Is independence now very much on the cards?
I think clearly we are moving in the direction of some sort of independence. You can call it supervised independence or limited independence or whatever. Because regrettably we did not achieve the consensus in the UN Security Council that would have been necessary to move firmly into a new stage. At the same time, status quo is unsustainable, and we'll move on. And we from the European Union side will take a responsibility for the situation. We'll have to do it, although the conditions are perhaps less than ideal due to the disagreement in the international community.
And you're talking about the EU taking responsibility. I mean, what does that mean? What concrete steps does that involve?
Well, first it means deploying a mission in Kosovo itself to help them with primarily the development of the rule of the law and the protection of the minority and those sorts of things. These are things that have been done by the UN mission there, a much larger one, for a number of years. But it will be necessary now in the new stage supervised independence. That's one thing. Secondly, is develop a policy for the region as a whole. I mean, it's only by integrating gradually into the European Union that we can hope of both overcoming the divisions that have been plaguing the Balkans for such a long time and revive the economies. And without reviving the economies, there is little hope of that new feeling of modernization and democracy and stability that is a precondition for the development of this part of Europe.
But would Kosovan independence pit Russia against the EU?
Well, to some extent it will. Russia has voiced strong objections. Some of these objections are not entirely invalid, I would have to say, because we are doing something that is rather unique, but Kosovo is a unique case. What Russia is saying is that, well, there are other cases. Yes, there are other cases, but they are fundamentally different in our opinion. But there will be an ongoing debate. And that debate is bound to continue in different international organizations for, I would guess, years to come. Where there will be a battle over the position, the exact status of Kosovo. But what concerns me the most, I must say, is the economic and social situation in Kosovo itself. I mean, if we now define the status of Kosovo, that's a good thing. But it doesn't necessarily give bread, job, prosperity, hopes for the future for the ordinary people of Kosovo. And they are in a situation which is not quite Gaza. But in terms of unemployment, all of the economic figures are fairly horrible. And that we need to address in the years to come.
So you want economic settlement, if you like, but what about the risk of renewed violence? Because we know Serbia isn't going to like this very much.
Serbia is not going to like it very much. But I don't see any risk of Serbia taking big military action or anything of that sort. I mean, the Serbian president has made that, who's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, have made that abundantly clear. What we do hope is that there will be the avoidance of incidents between the Albanian and Serb groups inside Kosovo. And we do hope that we can also avoid major flows of refugees. I mean, there is a certain risk that there will be a major refugee flow.
Well, that is a risk. So what could the EU do there to prevent refugee flow or flashpoints occurring in the region?
Well, we can provide assurances on the long-term perspective. Because I think the fear that is there among the minority, there is 100,000 or more than that minorities. There are 250,000 who have already fled, who are in Serbia, primarily Serbs, but also Romans and others. And it's important to preserve the minorities that are still there in Kosovo. We can provide assurance that they will be protected. We can provide assurance that we would give a long-term perspective of economic development for them. We will of course warn very clearly against those extremists on either side that could have an interest in provoking different incidents that will lead to refugee flows and further confrontations.
What's your timetable then now on independence? How many weeks or months are we actually talking about?
Well, not very many. But that remains to be defined in details. But we are clearly talking about something that's going to happen within the next few months.
Let me just move on to Iraq. I know you were there yourself before Christmas. How do you see the situation there? There's been some hopes that because of the surge of troops, violence has been diminishing. Did you find or see that for yourself?
Well, I was there primarily in sort of Baghdad, and then you spend most of your time inside the green zone, so you can't really judge by your own eyes the entire country. But there's no doubt that there has been a significant increase in or improvement in the security situation in most parts of the country. That's good. There are signs of a somewhat more revived Iraqi economy, and that means a lot to the ordinary people. What is moving forward very slowly is the sort of reconciliation between the major groups of the country. That never really happened throughout the entire existence of Iraq. So we shouldn't be surprised that it's taking some time now. There are some good signs. The de-Baathification law is a significant step forward. There's also a step forward in the dialogue that is there with the neighbors of Iraq. That's the Iranians, that's the Saudis, that's the Jordanians, that's the Syrians. That includes the Americans, and that includes the European Union. That's very important. What I would hope is that there would be perhaps increased support from the other Arab states for the Iraqi government. I think one of the things that strikes you when you are there is that, of course, there's a huge Iranian embassy in Baghdad. That's perhaps not that strange. I mean, they're a big neighbor. It is significantly smaller than the US embassy, to put it in the mildest possible terms. But there's no embassy from Saudi Arabia. And that's bad. I mean, the other Sunni Arab states need to understand what's at stake in Iraq, I think.
Okay. Carl Bildt, thank you very much for coming along today. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. It's 7:59. Well, let's go back to the head of Davos Ski School, Daniel Amann, for a look at what the weather is looking like in Davos. Daniel, we see dawn is breaking behind you. How do you see the outlook for today?
The outlook actually is really good. We had an overcast throughout the night, so the temperatures are around 0 degrees. There's a light wind from the northeast, which will move the cloud fields away. And again, for the afternoon, it's going to be real sunny and just gorgeous.
And what about where to ski this morning? Where would you be going if you were going out there today?
Actually, in terms of a whole skiing day, I wouldn't rush out in the morning based on the overcast or the little light cloud fields we still have. I would enjoy an afternoon in the sun and then go for a real special night skiing on Parsen with a lit up slope on not so cold temperatures.
Daniel, thanks very much indeed. Time again, it's exactly 8 o'clock. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters, and you're watching Davos Today, coming to you live from the heart of Davos with the latest from the World Economic Forum annual meeting. Coming up in just a few moments, we'll be speaking to the Prime Minister of Singapore. First, let's get an update on the markets in Asia. We cross live now to Tara Joseph in the Reuters Bureau in Hong Kong. Tara.
Hello, Steve. It has been a tremendous day of rallies to end the week here in Asia. Both commodities and stocks are soaring. Investors cheering a U.S. economic rescue plan. Late on Thursday, congressional leaders and the White House confirmed a $150 billion stimulus package of tax rebates for families. There are also incentives for business investment. Well, here, trading rooms are full of talk about SocGen's trader who managed to trigger $7 billion in trading losses under the noses of top executives. But the news is just not disturbing market activity. Japan's Nikkei ended the week on a very strong note, up 4.1% at the close 1 hour ago. This was the largest one-day gain for the Nikkei in nearly 6 years. Mizuho Bank was a top gainer. Japan's second largest lender jumped 11%. On talk, the firm will form a business tie-up with India's largest bank. Japanese media reports say the tie-up with Bank of India is set to be announced later on in the day. It's also been a top day for commodities. Gold is glittering, now matching a record high set last week and trading at about $914 an ounce. A weak dollar and expectations the U.S. Federal Reserve may again cut interest rates next week, helping the precious metal. And oil enjoying a second-day rally. Fears of a U.S. recession seem to be fading away. Crude oil is now trading at about $89.98 a barrel. Well, strong oil and gold counters giving a big boost to the Hang Seng Index here in Hong Kong. It's up 6.6% in afternoon trade. So as you can see, a very strong end to what has been a roller coaster week for Asia markets, Steve. European markets are seen following Asia higher today. But looking ahead to next week, all eyes on what the Fed will do at its monetary policy meeting. Back to you in Davos.
Thanks, Tara. Let's check in with Siddhartha Dubey at Reuters Newsroom in London for a look at the world news headlines. Siddhartha.
Hi, Steve. Israel has carried out several airstrikes against Palestinian targets in the border town of Rafah in southern Gaza, killing at least 4 people. The strikes targeted vehicles which the Israeli army said had terror operatives inside. Right here, the latest Reuters pictures from Gaza, which have just come into our newsroom. Strikes against militants in Gaza are frequent. The border at Rafah has been breached in a series of explosions, with thousands of Palestinians pouring into Egypt to stock up on food and fuel following an Israeli blockade. To Iraq, and the top police official in the northern city of Mosul was killed on Thursday when he was touring the site of the previous day's explosion. This is a massive crater caused by an explosion that killed 36 people and wounded 169 others on Wednesday. Many women and children perished as buildings around the explosion collapsed. Dozens of wounded people were brought to a nearby hospital. The police officer held the title of Brigadier General and was killed when a suicide bomber walked up to him and detonated himself. In Washington, President George W. Bush says his $150 billion fiscal stimulus package will help the economy.
The incentives in this package will lead to higher consumer spending and increased business investment this year. Importantly, this package recognizes that lowering taxes is a powerful and efficient way to help consumers and businesses.
The size of the package is equivalent to around 1% of the American economy and is aimed at preventing a full-blown recession. Italy's Prime Minister Romano Prodi has resigned after losing a confidence vote in Parliament. Prodi's centre-left government lasted less than 2 years. His defeat came after a small religious party resigned from his coalition. This is what happened as the news broke in the upper house Senate.
Senatori, no, per favore, togliete quella bottiglia là.
Romano Prodi will continue to serve as Prime Minister until Italy's president appoints an interim government. Well, Steve, that's it from London. Back to you.
Siddhartha, thanks very much indeed. Well, Singapore is fast expanding in the wealth management arena, attracting funds away from Switzerland as it cements its role as a major financial centre in Asia. However, Singapore's price inflation is at a 25-year high at 4.4%, and growth shrank for the first time since 2003 in Q4, contracting by 3.2% compared with Q3, although growth for the year was 7.5%. I'm joined now in the studio by Lee Hsien Loong, the Prime Minister of Singapore. Mr. Lee, thank you very much for coming in. We had Citigroup just today sort of casting some doubts on that 7.5% growth performance. Do you see it coming off that this year?
Yes, I see it coming off that. We had 7.5% last year. This year we forecast somewhere between 4.5% and 6.5%. But obviously there's some uncertainty because we don't know how the US economy will perform, and it'll affect us. So we will see how it goes.
How rattling for you was that fallout in the Asian markets on Monday? It seemed to come out of nowhere in a way. And does it show a rather nervous mood in Asia?
It's not just a roller coaster ride, it's like a bungee jump. But it's bounced back. And yesterday again, I think the fundamental real economy is sound. So I think we can ride this.
What's worrying them? Is it really what's happening in the US at the end of the day that was driving those fears?
I think it's a worldwide pool of liquidity. I mean, the markets are all linked together. There's no decoupling of markets possible. So once the US markets go down and the US sentiments go down, it affects markets all over the region. Big question is whether it affects the real economies all over Asia, and that we are hopeful will have some buffer.
So when you see President Bush there giving away, what is it, $600 to every family, you're quite, in the US, you're quite pleased to see that?
We cheered him too.
A lot of talk here in Davos about sovereign wealth funds, and Singapore has one, I believe, and they've been playing quite an active role, and funds have been going towards the West, if you like, towards Western institutions. Do you see more of that happening?
Well, I think the funds are likely to grow over the next few years because the basic factors which lead to the money gathering will continue, whether it's oil prices being high or trade imbalances leading some countries to accumulate foreign reserves. How they play it, we will have to see. Our philosophy generally in Singapore has been to go in a low-profile way and not to make bold and exciting moves, but move cautiously, preserve the value, invest this commercially for long-term sustainable returns.
Sovereign wealth funds tend to be passive investors, and there have been people here in Davos saying, well, maybe it would be better if they were active investors and we'd find out a bit more about them, what they want, what their aims are. Could you see that in Singapore's case?
We are quite open about what we do and what our intentions are, and also the way we have the governance worked out, how they manage, what are the checks and balances. Temasek Holdings, which is one of our entities, actually publishes an annual report giving financial figures. The GIC, which manages the rest of our money, has been much more circumspect about its disclosure. I think going forward it's likely to do more, but there are certain safeguards which we will need to have.
Right, so maybe a bit more disclosure coming forth in the future, perhaps. Yes. What about looking for your relationships with China? You've got an economic powerhouse in China on your doorstep. Singapore was known for years as the powerhouse in Asia in one sense, and now China is obviously a huge and dominating presence. Does that, does that concern you that you're in that very competitive relationship with them?
We were not in the same league as China. They are 300 times bigger than us.
In terms of dynamism.
It's good for us that China is doing well, because its dynamism, its vibrancy is energizing the whole of Asia and in fact the whole world economy. What we need to do is to make sure while China is growing and going faster, we stay ahead of the game and we keep on being relevant and being able to contribute something which the others cannot yet do, so that, well, we participate in their prosperity and we do well for ourselves.
Just look at the security situation in the region. You're a member of ASEAN along with Myanmar. What can ASEAN do about the unrest there, and how much does that concern you? Do you ever think about cutting trade links or reducing those?
It worries us what's happening in Myanmar. We've stated our position that we think the status quo is not sustainable, that they have to move ahead with national reconciliation, a more legitimate government, and economic development. And they can't go back to the status quo ante before the demonstrations, before the monks got suppressed. We don't have a lot of leverage, practically. And I think it is counterproductive for us to have sanctions on Myanmar.
Just finally, what about Davos itself? Come a long way here. Do you find the sessions here useful? What do you get out of it?
Well, this year has been different because everybody is here after the market instability over the last few months. And so it's been a marvelous way to meet a lot of people in a very short period of time.
Indeed it is. Mr. Lee, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's take a quick look at some of the sessions on the agenda at the forum today. Here's Nidhi Dutt.
Emerging markets and globalization will be on the agenda in Davos today. The so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, are now emerging as global superpowers. But as they become the places to do big business, the question is, which countries will play home to the next set of emerging markets? The UK's Prime Minister Gordon Brown will be discussing the big issues that face Britain. Also appearing in that debate will be the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Also on the agenda, how the global economic slowdown is affecting developed and developing countries in different ways. Leading the debate on this issue will be the President of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, along with the Vice Chairman of the People's Republic of China, Zheng Xuei, and the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Timothy Geithner. Bite-sized technology has played a big role in making the world a smaller place. The head of Google USA, Eric Schmidt, and the chairman and CEO of Sony Corporation, Sir Howard Stringer, will be debating how convergence in communication will affect consumers around the world. Also appearing will be the chairman and chief executive of China Mobile Communications, Wang Jianzhou. Some of Asia's leaders will be discussing the emergence of a new regional community, including the Prime Ministers of Malaysia, Singapore and the President of the Philippines, Gloria Arroyo. Other sessions taking place today are moving people and goods around the globe, political Islam and democracy, long-term value in a short-term world, and USA, what next after the elections. Today, the World Economic Forum will also honor artists who have used their art to reach out to other cultures. American cellist Yo-Yo Ma and British actress Emma Thompson will be awarded the organization's Crystal Awards. All that and more on the third day of Davos 2008.
Well, technology companies are well represented here in Davos, so it's not surprising that the private equity company that made its name investing in the sector is here too. Silver Lake's investment portfolio includes companies like Avaya, Gartner, NASDAQ and SunGard Systems. The pension fund CalPERS owns a near 10% stake in the company. Charles Giancarlo is the managing director of Silver Lake and he joins me now. I know, Charles, you're taking the technology pulse here. How's that been affected by this slightly gloomy mood around the economy that's been developing here?
Well, of course, a lot of the technology executives are concerned about the markets overall, but as I've taken a poll of the different executives and just asked them a very simple question, which is, what is the tenor of the business right now? And they say, well, the business is good. The results are coming in. We're just worried about the psychology around all of this. And so everyone's sort of waiting for the next shoe to drop, but they're not seeing their business yet.
It's interesting. The people who've been coming in here who are actually running real businesses seem quite a bit more upbeat about the year ahead than the bankers and the economists. Now, is that just spin from them, or do you think they're just seeing something that isn't really being noticed?
Well, obviously the bankers are reeling from some very real economic events that have taken place that they have to report, and some of them are losing jobs and some of them are not going to get bonuses, and so it's a very real environment for them. But then extending that to some real potential economic activity or losses in other sectors of the economy is still speculation at this point. And a lot of especially the industrial companies are looking at their performance and they're saying, well, we just don't see it yet. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of the high-tech executives saying, well, we're a little bit cautious about the future, but at least as far as right now is concerned, business seems pretty good.
But logically, if companies become hard-pressed for cash, if the consumer goes on strike, whatever, they're not going to spend, the corporates you're interested in are not going to spend so much on technology, are they?
Right, well, and that's the concern. But I think what we're seeing right now is that a lot of the concern is around, or a lot of the losses that have taken place in banks are mark-to-market losses, not real defaults at this point. And the possibility exists, of course, that there'll be far less defaults than the amount of marking down that's taking place, and therefore the economy may not suffer as badly as some of the projections.
You're looking around for technology investments. Where are you looking for them? Where do you want to put your money?
Right. Well, it's actually a good time for technology investments right now because of all the uncertainty, because of the market instability, because prices are coming down. Even though economic performance of many of these companies remains solid, or at least the long-term performance remains very, very positive. So it's a very good time. A lot of interesting areas. There's semiconductors, software remains a very exciting area, and actually services around technology as well. All of these are very good.
What about in terms of geography? Are you tending to look east a bit more?
We are. In fact, Silver Lake has grown from being North America focused to having significant activities in Europe, and now we are turning towards the Far East, China, India, as well as other regions around the Asia-Pac region.
What about Davos itself? Just briefly, how useful or not have you found it?
Well, I think you may recall when we spoke, I'm actually quite new to the private equity world, having come out of a major technology company myself just a few weeks ago. So for me, and actually for our group overall, it's a very useful environment because in a very small microcosm, we can meet lots of not only high-tech companies but other industries, bankers, et cetera, that we need to engage with on a regular basis, but can do it all here within a very short period.
Great for networking. Charles Giancarlo, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
It's more than a year now since Reuters opened a bureau in Second Life, the virtual world where users can make real money. And while some of the euphoria has died down since the last Davos summit, Second Life looks like it's here to stay. Reuters' Darcy Lampton has more.
From Second Life to real life, Philip Rosedale talks avatars and financial prospects with Adam Pasick in front of a live online audience. Rosedale is founder and chief executive of Linden Lab, the US company which operates the virtual world. Pasick is Reuters bureau chief in Second Life. Talk of the town last year in Davos, Pasick says this time things are different.
Following the hype, almost inevitably there's a backlash. And so at this point they've kind of weathered the backlash. They're still growing, not as quickly, but they still are adding users. And I think with some of the froth gone, you can get a more accurate idea of what's really going on without it being kind of distorted through the lens of sensationalist articles.
And while the honeymoon period may be over, Rosedale's confident his business model is built to last.
As a company right now, we're about 250 people. We have built out all the major pieces of our business that we need to operate, and we're profitable now. So we don't have that imperative of finding a crucial partner or making some sort of a turn to monetizing Second Life in a different way. We're operating well and standing alone, so we've no immediate plans as regards listings or partnerships.
Despite its virtual setting, Rosedale says Second Life has real solutions for global problems. Battling climate change is just one example.
It is a really powerful tool for eliminating the need for business travel, and more people than just me and the company have talked about this. It's very interesting tool. As technology begins to give us real tools for face-to-face collaboration, that is going to have a big impact on the environment because people will stop traveling. You know, I don't know what percentage of air travel is business travel, but I think it's the majority of it. So, you know, the opportunity for change there is significant.
So you're not very popular in the aviation sector?
I guess not. I haven't run into anybody here at Davos who's complained, but I wouldn't rule it out.
7 times, actually. Well, globalization has been much on the minds of delegates here in Davos. Few brands are better known than Burger King, and the fast food chain CEO John Chidsey is with me right now. John, we're seeing that stimulus package in the US. It must have been music to your ears because you don't want your consumers stopping buying. But how concerned are you when people are talking about a US recession?
Well, obviously, in general, a recession is not a good thing. But having said that, though, we're probably as well positioned as anybody, and not just Burger King. Really, if you look at the QSR space, the quick service restaurants or fast food restaurants, we tend to be counter-cyclical because as people have pressure on disposable income, I like to say people trade for value. Some people call it trading down. I'd call it trade for value. If you look at the year we just ended on June 30th, we had our best traffic year in 10 years. And the last quarter we reported, we said, was even stronger than that year. So in a funny way, it actually, I think, proves the point that it is a very counter-cyclical industry.
I think it just rubbished my next question, but I was going to say, you know, people in a health-conscious world, no doctor ever recommended that you go and buy a Whopper. Does that concern you that you're under a bit of pressure there?
Well, I would say, you know, everything in moderation. It's all about exercise and balance. But I would also say, you know, our brand promise at Burger King has always been have it your way. And so we make all of our sandwiches to order, so you can say hold the mayonnaise, hold the whatever the sauce is, and you know, if you think about sandwiches like a chicken sandwich with no mayonnaise, no sauce, it's actually like 5 grams of fat. We have salads, we have lots of healthy alternatives for people on the menu to choose from.
Now, what about when you expand overseas, and I know you have, where are you seeing opportunities there for your chains?
Well, for us, it's almost everywhere, so I have to smile a bit. We're a bit behind our competitors in that sense. We have about 4,000 restaurants outside the U.S. McDonald's has 20,000. Yum has north of 20,000. So we've got huge opportunities in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. If I had to pick one continent today, I'd say it'd be Europe and the Middle East, and I would say over the next 5 years, Asia would certainly outpace that.
So you're going somewhere like the Middle East. What about those sort of cultural issues there in terms of the food that's on offer, and I suppose the environment even in which it is offered? Do you have to tweak the offering quite a bit?
Well, we have halal offerings in the Middle East, but we do remarkably well there in Saudi Arabia, you know, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, etc. So it's a great market for us.
And what about Davos itself? You just told me just before we went on, this is your first visit here. How have you been finding it?
It's actually been a great experience. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity to meet and interact with people, and also learn a lot about, you know, trends that are affecting other people's consumer businesses as well as yours, to sort of gauge, are you really on track? Are you way off base, and should you be rethinking your strategy?
So you're booking for next year already?
Absolutely.
John Chidsey of Burger King, thank you very much for coming in. Well, Societe Generale faces tough questions today over its failure to spot a rogue dealing fraud in which a single trader triggered a $7 billion loss. Analysts and newspapers have questioned how long France's second largest bank can remain independent. This morning's newspapers make grim reading for Societe Generale. Libération today plays on the bank's name with the headline Irresponsabilité Générale, and Le Monde is headlined Questions and Incredulity after the Societe Generale fraud. Well, Joanna Partridge from Reuters brings us the latest on the SocGen scandal.
French bank Societe Generale reveals fraud by a single trader, identified by SocGen sources as Jérôme Kerviel, has caused it to lose 4.9 billion euros. SocGen, France's second largest listed bank and one of its most prestigious blue-chip companies, said it would seek emergency funds. If the fraud is proved, it would be the biggest loss ever caused by a single trader, far outstripping the $1.4 billion loss caused to Barings Bank by Nick Leeson in the 1990s. Societe Generale turned down Chairman and Chief Executive Daniel Bouton's offer of resignation. Bouton told a news conference the bank would still have positive results for 2007, despite the fraud.
La situation était très solide.
The situation was very stable, as we didn't have any liquidity problems, even after this fraud. However, in order to continue profitable development in all our lines of work, the board of directors considered it necessary to carry out an increase in capital.
But the bank's expected 2007 net profit of between 600 and 800 million euros would be well below its 2006 profit figure. And SocGen has also announced further write-downs of over €2 billion related to the global credit crunch. French Prime Minister François Fillon, in Switzerland at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, tried to calm nerves. He said the fraud was serious, but didn't have anything to do with current market turbulence.
Je note que la Société Générale, malgré cette fraude, affiche un bilan.
I note that despite this fraud, Société Générale is posting positive results. I note that it has taken important steps to address the situation. I note the Bank of France has indicated that it doesn't have any worries about the stability of this bank. I am pleased about that, and I should tell you that the French government is following the case with very, very great attention.
Meanwhile, Bank of France Governor Christian Noyer told a news conference new measures will have to be introduced to prevent malpractice like this fraud happening in future. SocGen shares were initially suspended from trading on the news, but later fell by over 6%. Joanna Partridge, Reuters.
Well, they're really talking about that SocGen story here in Davos, and we've just been hearing that the chairman of SocGen, Daniel Bouton, took out a full-page advert in French newspapers apologising to SocGen shareholders, saying the situation is completely unacceptable, and the Bank of France's governor, as we're saying, says he's not worried about French banks' exposure to subprime. The time now, it's 8:24 here on Davos Today. Let's just take a look at the Asian markets, which actually rallied today, helped by that stimulus package from the US. The Nikkei up 536 points, that's over 4%. The Hang Seng Index up over 6%, big gain there at 24,984. In Shanghai, not so well there, just up just a fraction below a percentage point of 4,761. And in India, the Sensex, which is still trading just by the looks of it, is on a 4.8% gain at 18,048. We'll keep you updated on the markets and other news about SocGen throughout the day on the Reuters wires, and we'll visit that tomorrow in the programme, we hope, when we broadcast on our last day from Davos on Saturday. Well, as we know, the Fed slashed interest rates this week as stock markets around the world fell on fears the US is tipping into recession. Jane Barrett asked ECB member Axel Weber whether he was worried that market volatility was threatening growth.
Current financial turbulence have hit both the financial industry and the real economy in a stage where actually it was very resilient, stronger than in the last few years. So now there is a correction, and I really caution market participants to not overdo and to not exaggerate this short-term volatility. In the medium term, the outlook for the global economy is still good, it's still robust, so I have no reason for pessimism at this stage. There was exuberance, there was euphoria before, and some of this euphoria goes, I think, for good and I think for right.
So what are your main concerns now looking ahead into the medium term? Is it still inflation?
Our main concerns for the euro area are that inflation at the moment is above our tolerance level. We have the expectation that this will moderate throughout this year and into next year, but there are some risks to the outlook. There is the risk of higher wage settlements, renewed oil prices, geopolitical tensions, and for growth we expect growth around potential, so not extraordinary high, but relatively normal growth, basically along the capacity of the euro area economy. But at the same time, there are some downside risks for growth. We also said that, and we have to keep a focus on these downside risks. But the data are mixed. I don't think we have a clear indication that the euro area economy is substantially weakening. Look at what came out today in the IFO index in Germany. It's been better than expected, so we do see positive and negative data, but overall I think the balance of risk is to the downside, but the medium-term outlook is still reasonably good.
Thank you very, very much indeed.
Axel Weber there. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. It is 8:27. Well, before we go, let's have one last weather check from Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos. It's dawn behind you, Daniel. A little bit of cloud I can see behind you. What's the forecast for today?
Yeah, actually the forecast looks real nice. We had an overcast throughout the night. Temperatures around 0 degrees. There's some light cloud fields only in the morning, and again in the afternoon the sun will come out and it's going to be just a beautiful day.
And in terms of skiing, what's the best place to go to today? Where would you recommend?
Basically, in the afternoon you could go everywhere because all the slopes are freshly groomed. It's a lot of snow laying everywhere, so you can ski and enjoy yourself. But me personally, I would go in the evening for a night skiing on Parsen.
Do you have a torch for that, or just do it in the dark?
No, actually, you don't have to do it in the dark. That's the nice thing about it. It's a lit up slope, and the temperature will not be as cold as it was yesterday, for an example. And so you see the city from the top of the mountain at night, and this by itself, it's a wonderful experience.
Any feel, Daniel, for the weekend weather? Delegates are probably going to actually start getting their skis out tomorrow. What's the hopes there?
It looks really, really positive. So tomorrow it should be from the very early morning, just a fantastic day, lots of sun, a very good sight, and really the days to be out Saturday and Sunday.
Great, because I'm going to be there. Daniel Lohmann, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from Davos Today. We've had the Philippine President, the Singapore Prime Minister, and the head of Barclays Capital on today. We'll have more top guests from amongst the delegates tomorrow for our last broadcast from Davos. So we hope you'll join us at 7:30 tomorrow morning. We'll see you then. From me, Steve Clark for Reuters, goodbye for now.